Today my guest is Phil Japikse. Phil, how are you?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm enjoying this conference here in, where are we? Wilmington,
Ohio.
Let's talk about testing, because I understand that you're planning to write a book on testing.
I am, yeah.
Well, tell me, why is testing important to you?
Well, testing is important to me because it makes my job easier. I've always worked really hard up front so I can be lazy down the road.
That's interesting. You say it makes you hard. Testing, I always thought, I agree with you that it makes your job easy in the long run, but in the short term it is work.
It is work.
You have to write those tests. You have to think about testing.
Yeah, but if you look at the lifetime of a project, so I don't know how many people have written a project that they've never touched the code again. Mm-hmm. And if you know for a fact you're never going to touch that code, testing's probably overkill.
Unless I have to touch that code again.
But not whether it's you touching your own code or somebody touching the code, right? If you've got a throwaway app, it's a one-time conversion thing.
Okay, sure.
Then testing's overkill. But if somebody, whether it's you or somebody else, has to touch that code and you don't have tests in place, then you've just significantly increased the amount of work over the long term of a project.
Okay, so that's that safety net that testing provides, automated testing is going to provide.
Well, not only that, but it's a communication mechanism.
Oh, so what do you mean?
So when I go look at an open source project, like I'll download the latest version of Hibernate, right? 2.12 just dropped. I actually look at the tests. I'll look at the unit tests that they have in place to see what's changed, to see how a project works. I don't have to look at a design document to understand Hibernate.
Okay.
I can look at the unit tests, I can find a test similar to what I'm trying to do, and I can follow that path of execution and know exactly how I need to call the code.
Oh.
So if I give you a suite of unit tests with code that I've written, and I don't have a lick of documentation, because to be honest, I don't write documentation very well, if at all, you can look at my tests, and you can know not only what the code does, but the spirit of the code.
The spirit, what do you mean?
Well, the intent,
Okay.
right? Anybody can read a line of code,
Uh-huh.
but you had to be there at the time when it was being written to really understand what the intent of that code was.
Okay, so I'm hearing you right then. The unit tests are actually calling this API, these public methods, and the unit tests are calling it, a lot of times, in the same way that I, as a developer, are going to be using that API.
Yes.
So that's the documentation. Those patterns that are called, that are used inside the unit tests, I can follow those, and it'll show me what methods are available and how they're being called, and what kind of parameters can be passed to
Right,
them.
and limitations.
And the limitations of where errors are going to occur, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And to correct you, just one thing, it's
Yeah.
not just the public methods that you're testing.
Okay.
You test everything, whether it's publicly exposed or not.
Well, let's talk about that. There's some controversy around that.
Well, there is some controversy
So
around that.
you tell me your
You test everything, whether it's internal or public.
internal.
And
So this is an interesting point. Let's dive into this here a little bit. I want to know your opinion, because you're saying I have public methods, I have internal methods, I have private methods.
No private methods.
So you don't have any private
I don't
methods
have
at
any
all.
private methods.
You make everything exposed to the world.
No. Internals are only exposed if you explicitly grant permission for something to see it.
Okay. All right.
So I have a project,
right.
and it's got some classes, and it's got some internal methods. So you decorate that project, and it's a push, it's not a pull, and you say internals visible to, it's an attribute at the assembly level.
Yep.
And then you have to put in the strong name of the projects that are allowed to see the internals.
I see.
So my test project has full access to the internals, but nobody else does.
Okay, interesting. So you avoid private methods entirely, which kind of gets around this controversy of what should be public, what should be private. Everything that I would think of as private, you just mark it as internal by
Yeah.
default.
So from an API standpoint, it is still
just like
private.
But it has the advantage that
Now I can test it.
you can test it. Okay, all right, good call. All right, so go on. Let's talk about your. I really want to dive into your philosophy on testing. We had Jim Holmes on the show earlier, and Jim is like you, very passionate about automated unit testing. And we talked about the reasons for automated unit testing and what the advantages are. We're both in agreement that
Yeah, absolutely.
many and compelling. I want to talk about your philosophy. How do you go approach unit testing on your projects?
Okay, so there's several habits that I've forced myself to get into, and these are really outside the scope of testing, but I think that they absolutely are required to be a good developer and a good developer in a test-driven environment. First and foremost, I'd say I keep a notepad next to my laptop or my workstation, and on that notepad, I write down everything that comes to mind. So at the start of the day, I'm a brand new project, I'm just starting the first time. You know, you sit there and you say, well, where do I start? Where do I write my first line of code? And any developer will sit there and say, well, I've got 5 or 6 things I can do, right?
Yep.
So I jot those 5 or 6 things down. I then look at my list and I take the easiest one among them all, right? So maybe it's, create a domain object for a person.
So the important thing is just to get started.
Get started.
That's why you pick the easy one,
Yeah.
because you get some traction. Well, let me ask you, why pencil and paper, pen and paper? Why not use a Kanban? Why not use OneNote or Notepad?
Well, see, Kanban is kind of the bigger picture thing. Sure. I'm talking about the individual
or even just the
tasks
task list,
that I'm
the
doing.
task list inside of Visual Studio, for example.
Because
Why
I have to
low tech
open
like
something. Then I have to open something. If I have a piece of paper, and I'm going to tell you the rest of the story with this. So I got a piece of paper. As I finish things, I cross them off my list, and then I go to the next easiest. If I'm in the middle of something, and a thought pops into my head and says, oh, crud, I forgot to do X, or I need to do this, right? Or I forgot to put this use case in, I don't context switch.
I see.
Computers can multitask, people cannot.
Sure.
Right? So as these things pop into my head, I write them down on my piece of paper, right? And then I finish the task at hand, cross it off, I then take the next easiest thing. And so at the end of the day, I fold up my laptop, put it in the bag, take my notepad, just as it is, put it in the bag. Totally forget about it, right?
Okay.
Get to work the next day or that night if I'm getting back online, pull my pad out, tear that top sheet off, and everything that wasn't crossed off, I write down again.
Okay.
So this puts me back in the frame of mind, the context of where I was working the day before. It's the same reason authors will a lot of time finish their writing session mid-sentence. And they'll leave a sentence undone, so to finish the sentence, they have to get back into the frame of mind, and so you have a nicer flow.
Okay.
So first and foremost, and I do it on a piece of paper because I don't want to have to open up Excel. I don't want to have to open up Visual Studio, go to a website, right? If I'm just sitting in Starbucks and I don't want to get online, and I want to knock out a quick task, I can just pull up my notepad, knock it out, cross it off, put the notepad back.
Okay. All right. Keep going. What
Okay,
else?
so that's the first thing. The second thing is how we use source code control. Hopefully by now everybody's watching your show, and I think you've beat it into them enough with the Technology and Friends episodes that we've done in the past, that
Source control is good.
you have to have
It's
source
it's
control,
really a necessity.
right?
I agree.
The problem that I run into a lot of times, I'll say, oh yeah, we have source control. We check in every time we do a release, right? Or something crazy like that, or I check in at the end of the day. So the habit you have to get into is red, green, refactor, check-in.
Okay.
So I have my failing test, I make my test pass, I refactor my code, I immediately check in at that point.
Yeah, so just real quickly define what red, green, refactor, how those relate to, I know you said it 2 different ways, but,
Okay,
so the red is you write your failing test.
red is a failing test.
Okay.
So then green is you write just enough code to make the test pass.
Yep.
And then you refactor to eliminate duplicate code and to make sure you include all your use cases,
Okay.
right? So if I'm writing a calculator or an add function,
Yep.
and I put in 2 plus 2 is my only use case that I test, my add method could just do return 4,
Yeah,
and the
that'll
test will
work
always
on one
pass,
particular test, yeah.
right? But it'll be green, right? So you have to refactor to expand it. As soon as you get that done, and it may take 10 minutes, it may take an hour, you check it in.
Okay.
So now the reason I do this, and I insist on my team doing this, is you've worked for 7 hours, right? You're getting that last hour of work, you're a little tired, your eyes are a little fuzzy, you're thinking about that happy hour everybody's going to,
Oh, the happy
right?
hour. Oh, yeah.
And you haven't checked in at all today.
Right.
This morning you got in, you got latest, you pulled it down, and you've now worked for 7 hours. And this happens to everybody at one point in time or another. So you've made a change, and it has broken everything, right? You've got all these failing tests, the code won't compile, this, that, and the other. And so you frantically hit Control-Z, and you realize it's got a buffer of 20.
Right.
And no matter how hard you hit it, it's not going to undo anymore. You have 2 choices at this point. You stay late and you fix the code and try and figure out what that change is.
Or you roll
back to
8
last
hours
time and you lose 7.5 hours worth of work.
Right.
If I had been checking in every time I refactor and every time I go green or refactor, and I'm checking in every 15, 20 minutes, and I screw something up,
You can always go
guess
back to
what?
20 minutes ago.
Revert. I've lost 20 minutes. I've actually gained time because I failed fast.
Yep.
And then now I'm moving forward. I know I have to go in a different direction. So that's something that, there's a lot of great testing documentation out there, a lot of speakers covering testing and blogs and everything else. And I think so much of those books are focused on how do you write a unit test? How do you use RhinoMox or some mocking framework? You know, what are the patterns around the actual testing themselves? But I think there's a way of life that we have to adopt in addition to just writing the tests that can really help you be more successful as a test-driven developer or behavior-driven developer.
Do you write your tests first?
I do write my tests first.
Okay.
I actually have switched over to use an MSpec, which is it's a port of RSpec. So it's using context specification style of testing, where so instead of having a test or having a class that I'm going to test, so I've got a person tests my person class, and I have my add person method and my add person tests test name. The context specification style was initially put forth by Scott Bellware, and what's so great about it is it's more of the user's voice. So a user would say something like, when I'm working with a customer service record, it should allow me to edit the address.
Okay.
It should respond in less than 1 second if I have over 1,000 records. So the MSpec, which Aaron Jensen is the one who wrote that, I think he's at Aaron Jensen on Twitter, very smart guy, ThoughtWorks, I believe. So he wrote this framework, so your class name is your context when working with a customer service record, and then your tests in there should allow me to edit the record, should respond within 1 second. So once you're in your specification, the actual specification itself, the should line within your C# code, then you have your normal arrange, act, assert, so you can use MB unit, N unit, whatever MS test, whatever test framework you want within there. The other beauty to MSpec is there's a command line utility that you can run against your assemblies, and it'll create documentation, either HTML documentation or an XML dump file of all the specifications you have in your code base, whether they're implemented or not, and whether they passed or not.
And this builds documentation for what your code is.
Builds documentation for what the code is doing. So I can publish that onto a team wiki as part of the build process.
And it looks kind of like English, so non-technical people could read it.
It looks exactly like English.
Words like should.
Well, not only can they read it, they can write it. Right. That's very different. So not to knock the user stories format, which is as an X, I want to Y for the benefit of Z. I think that's a great format. But to a lot of business folks that I've talked to, and some of them get it and they get it great, and that's fantastic. But from a lot of people coming from the business side, that's a foreign language to them.
I see.
And it's not so foreign that they can't read it and they can digest it, but I don't want to spend my time writing their requirements for them.
Right.
And there's some training involved in that, right? And getting them used to using that language format.
Okay.
The context specification they pick up almost immediately.
It's just a domain-specific language.
Absolutely.
Between testers and developers. All right. That's a lot of information, Phil. Quick, you have an online presence.
I do. Yep. My blog is skimedic.com, SKIMEDIC. That's ski as in snow ski, because I volunteer for the National Ski Patrol, and medic as in paramedic, because I'm a firefighter paramedic for local township.
You're a busy guy.
I'm a busy guy, and the reason I'm also Ski Medic on Twitter, and the reason I'm Ski Medic is nobody can ever pronounce or say Japikse.
Japikse.
There you go.
That's not right.
And Dave and I have known each other for a long time.
I've said it wrong before.
He said it wrong before on this show, as a matter of fact.
I edited that out.
And so my online presence is skimedic.com. My blog's there. I've got sample presentations, abstracts, things like that. And then hopefully this summer, I'm going to start writing a book on, the working title is Testing for the Mere Mortal. And I don't have a publisher yet, but I've got an outline worked up, and hopefully I'll get some time to work on it.
Phil, thanks a lot.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Enjoy the conference.
Yeah. Hopefully by now everybody's watching your show, and I think you've beat it into them enough with the Technology and Friends episodes that we've done in the past.